Greetings, greenhouse people. I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and in an effort to provide this critical information in any way you choose to consume it, we're pleased to offer the discussion in video and podcast formats. My guest today is Josh Henry, a technical specialist with Ball Seeds Technical Services, who's here to share protocols for coleus propagation as part of our Tech on Demand series covering key annuals and perennials commercially produced around the world. Vegetative Coleus sales are booming thanks to excellent breeding programs developing varieties for a wide range of uses, from small space containers to massive landscape applications. But like many crops, receiving, handling, and propagation requires attention and specific protocols to avoid losses. Josh is here to help reduce risk in this process. If you like this installment, be sure to subscribe to the Tech on Demand podcast on your favorite app and find dozens of Tech on Demand videos on the Ball Seed YouTube channel. But that's enough out of me. Josh, welcome to Tech on Demand, and how should our viewers and listeners approach vegetative coleus propagation?
Thanks a lot, Bill. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here talking about vegetative coleus propagation. Luckily, as far as vegetative coleus are concerned, they're one of the easier crops to propagate vegetatively. But there are definitely some things that we need to keep in mind moving forward from a disease standpoint, timing standpoint, things like that. So let's jump into it. Starting off with the background, it's first important to note that this presentation is going to be on vegetative coleus. We do have lots of varieties out there on the market, both in terms of seed coleus and vegetative coleus. This presentation is going to cover URCs. Some of the benefits of the different vegetative coleus that we have on the market, one of the big ones is that they have been bred to have a very long juvenility stage, which means that they do not flower very early. It takes a long time for them to get to flowering. So we typically don't have issues with early flower induction with a lot of these vegetative varieties. Another consideration is that a lot of these varieties are going to be more sun tolerant, so they can handle those shady situations, but they can also handle a lot more sun than some of the seed coleus, especially some of the older seed coleus genetics. And then they also have a lot of really interesting and unique growth habits, leaf textures, leaf patterns, things like that that make them stand out and make them a really unique part of the offerings that we have available in the annuals market. Propagation time is usually pretty quick, depending on the variety, somewhere between about 2 and 4 weeks. Of course, that again is going to depend on the variety and also the time of year. Earlier propagation will typically take a little bit on that longer end, 4 weeks or so, and as we move later into the season, it's going to be a little bit quicker. Moving into stage 0, or when you receive and stick these URCs, they can be considered priority group 2. And what that means is that they don't necessarily need to be stuck immediately, like our group 1 priority URCs, but they should still be stuck the same day that they arrive if possible. And so if you do need to hold them, you can for a short amount of time. Typically, the recommendation would be to hold them at about 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit for about 24 hours. And remember to give them high humidity so they maintain their turgidity and don't get too wilty. If they do start losing their turgidity, if they get dehydrated, it's important to consider rehydrating them by either dipping the cuttings into water, or if you have a fog system, you can use that to help rehydrate those as well. You do see a link there in the corner of the slide for some best management practices for URC hydration. So if you need more information on URC hydration, please consider going to that link. When you're sticking these cuttings, typically that should be done in ellie pots or just a loose propagation media, something with good drainage and aeration. Some of the common tray sizes that we use are going to be something like a 50 to a size 105. The substrate pH is going to be pretty generic, something around a 5.8 to a 6.0, and typically rooting hormone is not necessary. Moving into stage 1, from the point of stick to when you have a callus cutting, one of the first things that you should do is consider making an initial fungicide treatment. And this isn't important just for coleus, but for a lot of our vegetative crops. There's a lot of different fungal diseases. Things like botrytis are very, very common in propagation, but we also do need to worry about things like downy mildew, which is a very specific issue to coleus and some of our other crops. So getting a fungicide on there quickly is going to be a great way to reduce the spore load and try and make sure that we don't have any issues with these types of fungal pathogens. Daconil weatherstick is a really great option for propagation because it does do a better job sticking to those cuttings. It's a great way to try and eliminate those botrytis issues. And then Pageant Intrinsic is also another great option to apply to those URCs after they've been stuck. It's good for both botrytis and downy mildew, and there's been some research that indicates that it can help with rooting as well. And one of the important things to consider too is if you're spraying this right after stick, allow that spray to remain on the foliage for a little bit before turning on the mist. And that way you'll make sure that the active ingredient is actually there on the leaf and able to be used. Continuing through stage one is typically going to be about 5 to 7 days. And again, that's going to be from stick to callus cutting. It's going to vary a little bit, again, depending on the time of the year and the variety that you're growing. The environmental conditions that you want to use typically are pretty warm temperatures, substrate temperature of about 68 to 72 Fahrenheit, daytime temperatures a little bit warmer there in that 75 to 80 degree range. Night temperatures also fairly warm in that 68 to 70 degree range. Light levels are going to be fairly low, somewhere around 100 to 200 micromoles per square meter per second. You'll typically have that mist running for those first 4 to 6 days or so, and you can start using fertilizer pretty early on because coleus do root fairly quickly. And you can use something like a 13-2-13, something that's high in nitrate and low in phosphorus, at a fairly low rate of about 50 to 75 parts per million nitrogen. We typically see those root initials emerging within about 5 to 7 days, and at that point we can remove them from the mist and move them into stage 2. Stage 2 is the point of callus to when you have a rooted cutting. That stage generally going to be around 7 days as well. The environmental conditions that you want to maintain, similar temperatures to stage 1. You can start increasing the light levels as those roots start to emerge from the cutting. You can increase them to about 200 to 400 micromoles. Fertilizer, you can increase those fertility levels a little bit, about 100 parts per million nitrogen. And a lot of recommendations say to alternate between something like a 13-2-13 and a 15-0-15. Again, we're leaning into those really high nitrate feeds that are going to help keep your plants nice and compact. At this point, it may be a recommendation to apply a PGR as well, especially for some of the larger varieties that we have on the market. One of the best recommendations is to use something like a B9 or a diminazide at about 1,500 to 2,000 parts per million, and typically this can be done somewhere around 10 to 12 days after stick. Moving into stage 3, this is also going to be roughly about 7 days. This is where we're going to put on the majority of our root and top growth as those URCs are developing into liners. The environmental conditions, again, temperatures are going to be roughly the same. The light levels are going to be about the same as well. Fertilizer is where you're going to start increasing, again, to push that top growth, get that vegetative growth to come out a little bit. So the recommendation would be, instead of doing 100 parts per million, you can move up to about 200 parts per million, again, from those 13-2-13 and 15-0-15 sources. And at this point, you can also start to kind of back off on the substrate moisture level. Hopefully up to this point, you've been keeping it at about a level 4, not completely drowning at a level 5, and you haven't been letting it dry down too much. But at this point, you can let it dry down to a level 2 before watering it back up to a level 4. And that's really going to help to push those roots out and develop a really nice root system on those liners. Stage 4 is toning, and this is, again, also going to last roughly 7 days. For the environmental conditions, as we move toward toning the plants, we want to reduce the humidity, increase the light levels a little bit. Fertilizer is going to be roughly the same as stage 3, somewhere in that 150 to 200 part per million nitrogen range. And again, you're going to want to water it up to a level 4 and bring it back down to a level 2. At this point, you may also consider doing a pre-ship or pre-transplant fungicide application, and depending on whether you're going to be using these liners in-house or shipping them out, pinching is typically done at transplant, so this would be a good point to consider whether or not you're going to do your pinch, or if you want to wait until you're actually transplanting these finished liners. So with that, hopefully that gives you some good background on propagating vegetative coleus.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. And for the listeners and viewers, you can find dozens, probably hundreds of Tech on Demand educational resources online. Send out a newsletter every week. We've created tons of videos for greenhouse professionals of all skill levels. And the Tech on Demand podcast is a great way to learn about technical topics on the go. Be sure to connect with more than 6,000 of your peers on the Greenhouse Tech Team Facebook group. All you need to do is search Greenhouse Tech Team, answer a few simple questions, and I'll let you right in. So, Josh, thank you so much for your time. And I know we're going to talk again soon because there are plenty of key crops to cover, and we got to finish Coleus.
Thanks a lot, Bill.
I'm Bill Calkins with Tech on Demand, and on behalf of our entire team, thanks for listening and watching, and take care out there.